All set.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll just go through a few slides. So again, tonight we're gathering here to go see Lori's great presentation, Top 10 Ideas for Starting a Career in UX. And Lori is the Vice President of User Experience at Fidelity in institutional banking or investing. I shouldn't have said banking. I said the B word, I meant the I word. And just to give some ideas for things, if people are looking to attend conferences or events out and about, UXPA International will be happening in person June 22nd. And that is going to be in Austin, Texas this year, which is a super fun city to visit. So if you're interested in attending that, that's always a really great, interesting conference to attend. There's also coming up next week, UX 360, which is a research summit, and that is going to be virtual, and that is February 15th through 16th. Also came across this interesting Thinkful webinar, and it's actually a rebroadcast of a webinar that happened already, but it's really interesting. It's about UX UI design, and it's creating a design system. So sort of the introduction to how to create a design system, what they are, gives some best practices, some examples of really good design systems, gives some kind of a deep dive into getting started with Figma. And then, you know, if you're getting started creating your own design system, and you can register for that, it's free, it's on Eventbrite. I'm kind of a design system nerd. And so I thought other folks might be interested in that as well. There's also a Boston Tech Career Fair coming out, and that's going to be happening on the 17th of February. It is an invite only, I saw, so you need to sign up in advance. You have to sort of apply on Eventbrite to be chosen to come in. And it's a fair with a focus on helping companies achieve their diversity and inclusivity initiatives. So they're looking for more diverse and non-traditional candidates. So I think that might be a really interesting fair to attend. And they're looking for tech folks, for UX researchers, UX designers, content folks. So that's pretty interesting. So look for that on Eventbrite. Eventbrite, a great resource for all of us. So right now, I'd love to open it up to anybody who might be looking for a job, for anybody whose team or anyone who's actually hiring. So feel free to come off the mute or raise your hand if you feel more comfortable doing that, and let us know. And also at the bottom, you'll see that we have a Google Jobs group link, and that is a place where we post jobs as well that we see. But feel free right now if you'd like to share any hiring or looking.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hillary. I'm new to the UX field. I completed my Springboard bootcamp in November, so I'm on the search for new opportunities. You can add me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to put it in the chat. And it's very nice to meet you all, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Hillary. Yes, definitely share your info in the chat. Would love to see the LinkedIn info. That would be great. Anybody else?
Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan Silamar, and I'm a graduate student in my final semester. And I'm also new to the UX industry, and I'm trying to find an opportunity at the moment too.
Great. So go ahead and share your LinkedIn or any other info you feel comfortable sharing in the chat. And it sounds like Lori is going to be just the ticket for the presentation will be really resonant for you. Anybody else? Anybody hiring? Nope. Okay. So I'm just going to pass it over to Lori now, because most of the info about Lori is actually in her presentation. And again, it is the top 10 ideas for starting a career in UX. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Lori.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. If anybody feels like going off video, I know no one really wants to, but that would be awesome, just so I feel like I'm talking to actual people. But Rachel, you can just stay on, right? Okay, I am going to share my screen. See if I can do this right. Everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so I just got this thing out here. All right, awesome. So again, thank you everybody for coming. As Rachel sort of stated, I currently lead a UXD group at Fidelity, and we're responsible for the institutional side of Fidelity. So we build products and services for financial advisors and their clients. I wanted to just show you quickly the agenda. It's first I'm going to start with a story, and then I'm going to go through this top 10, which is really more than 10, but I don't know, I started with that title, but each one has a couple subparts. And then all that's going to take about 40 minutes or so, and so we'll definitely have time for Q&A. I've actually done a lot of career mentoring and coaching, and one of the most common questions that I get is, how did you do it? How did you get into UX? And so because of this, I decided, I went back and forth on this, but I decided, like, uncomfortably that I'm going to talk about myself for about 5 minutes. Not just to help you get to know me, but also to give you some insight into one of the paths into UXD. And honestly, my path is a little bit convoluted, but the point here is to show you that no matter what your background or your experience, you can build a path into UX. So I started off in engineering at Lehigh, and it wasn't really something that I enjoyed. So I switched. I really liked the logic and the analytics behind it, but I switched majors and I ended up in finance. I decided in college that I wanted to be a portfolio manager or an investment banker 100%, which is pretty much what everybody in finance thinks they're going to do. But for anybody who's in this industry, not everybody can be in a portfolio manager or investment banker. So I got my first job out of college at Fidelity as a phone rep, and I was on my way. After a couple years there, I decided to go back to school and get a master's of science, and my plan was to get it in finance. And then I actually got some great advice from someone who was kind of mentoring me at the time, although it wasn't like an official mentor. And he had said to me, unless you know, like, for the rest of your life that you want to be 100% in finance, I'd recommend that you get an MBA. And that actually turned out to be great advice. I ended up enrolling at BU, and I went there part-time for my MBA for multiple reasons. One is I couldn't afford to stop working. Another one was I was at Fidelity. I had tuition reimbursement, which was great. And also because I was still young, I didn't have any like family or commitments, children. So I really could just like put my whole heart into going to school and working. And so when I got to grad school, I realized that I was actually more interested in marketing and communications than I was in finance. So good advice from the guy. I really enjoyed the creativity that was associated with some of the marketing courses. And I realized I also actually liked writing. So that's when I started to set my sights on a job change to marketing at Fidelity. But I couldn't get a job because I didn't have any experience. So sounding familiar to anybody? So what I did was I started thinking, how can I get the experience that I need within my current role so that I have some experience to take into the next role? And when I was a phone rep at Fidelity, I started working on this feedback system where we were collecting information from callers about, you know, what they were dissatisfied with. And we were realizing that there was a lot of misinformation that the phone reps were giving out. And I started to notice this trend. And the reason why I think there was a lot of misinformation, and I'm about to date myself, but we worked in a department where we gave out information on retirement plans. 403B, 401k plans. And so callers would call in and they'd tell us who they work for, and they'd ask us questions about their plan specifically. So we'd look in the binder and we'd give them some out. Oh, I just accidentally advanced and ruined my big surprise. But what we realized is that the reason why reps were giving the misinformation is because we were getting paper updates. When we were a bunch of kids recently out of college, we'd get handed all these plan updates on paper. We'd shove them in the front of the binder. We'd never update the other ones. We'd give out the wrong information. So it was a really painful process for the phone reps, and it also was costing the company a lot of money. So I worked on a proposal with a couple of friends of mine that happened to be developers to create an easy and simple way for the phone reps to more easily access the information. And I already blew this, but that, for anybody who's too young, was an old-fashioned computer. And so we took those binders and we put all the information online. And so that was really my first step into usability, where I realized I started setting this up in a way that the phone reps would be able to use it and access it quickly. So from there, I became interested in online information, and I started working at a couple of internet startups, developing my web production skills, and I was planning and building an extranet site for customers at my second startup. And what I realized is I was building something and I was like, this does not make sense. It's super confusing. I think it's not going to work for our customers. And I started to write surveys and study how to write surveys and how to ask these questions. And so without even knowing it, I started to unknowingly, I was doing user research and usability testing. So I took those skills, I went to Commonwealth Financial Network, so I was able to use some of my experience in the startups and also my financial services experience and get this job at Commonwealth Financial Network, where we were working on, my first job was to redesign their customer extranet site, which was a site for financial advisors. It was thousands of pages of content and a bunch of applications that the advisors would use to work with their clients. As I started to build the team at Commonwealth, I went back to school again, and this time I was 100% sure of what I wanted to do with my career. So I enrolled in Bentley's Master's of Science in Human Factors and Information Design. And it was there, and I don't use this word often, but I would literally go to class at night, and the next day I'd go to work and I'd use something that I'd learned the night before. It was like this complete melding of book smarts and street smarts. So over the next 15 years, I built out a UX team at Commonwealth, and it had a web production group, UI evolving into UX, some front-end developers, product managers, and technical trainers. So we were able in my group to create this whole great experience that developed over that 15 years. Eventually, I moved away from UX at Commonwealth, and I worked in customer experience for a few years. And then I decided that I really missed managing people. I missed UXD. And so I got my job back at Fidelity. And that's where I've been now for the past year. So why am I telling you so much information about me? The moral of the story is there's a million different paths that you can follow to work your way into a career in UX. And mine has all the elements. It has elements from all of the tips that I'm about to present to you. And my hope is that you'll walk away with at least a few ideas that you can immediately take action on. So I call these my top 10. Again, it's based mostly on my own experience and opinions. I've actually hired 13 UX designers in the last 8 months since I've been at Fidelity. So I really pulled from that. And some of the things that I was actually telling Rachel this before I got on this call, some of the things I put in there, I was thinking I think they're going to know all this, but I really pulled it from things that really you'll see when I get to towards the end, things that people have done in interviews that you might think somebody wouldn't do, but they did. So I just put a lot of stuff in here from my experiences. And then I also reached out to a number of my peers at Fidelity and my team to validate what I was going to be presenting and also to iterate it like any UX professional would do. So there's no order here. My assumption is that you've all completed some of what I'll be showing or considered it, but think about how you can apply these suggestions to whatever place you are in your transition to UX, or what more you might be able to do in any of the areas. And I do have a caveat. I'm very particular about putting too much information on a slide. I did want you all to be able to screenshot things if you found something interesting or that you didn't want to forget. So some of the slides are a little text heavy, but I still think you'll be able to digest it all. So the one thing, if you take away nothing else, is that you have to understand, like, there's no easy way. You can't just know. I mean, some people have probably done this to know someone and get a job, but generally it's going to be a little bit more work. You really are going to have to commit to putting in the work to get the job, especially when it's your first one and the job market now is being flooded with a lot of UX designers. So I almost put the easy button with the big X through it, but I didn't want to do that. But I promise all of you that if you commit to doing some of this, you'll find the job. It will happen. So what I'd like to do is, knowing that you will be more likely to follow through on your commitments, I would ask everybody that's on the call right now to either write down on a piece of paper, or if you're taking OneNote or whatever you're doing, just, I promise myself to commit to. And then as I go through these 10 areas, you can just write down a couple of things that resonate with you so that you're not overwhelmed, and you have this very simple list when I finish the call that you can start working on tomorrow. Let me see. I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to go through things from like education, which is probably the longest portion of the 10. We'll talk about, then we'll go into things like your, we'll talk about your portfolios, we'll talk about interviewing, so it kind of runs the gamut. Okay, so the first thing is the formal education. If you look up like the most common undergraduate degrees that UX designers have, I did that, and here's the list that I came up with. And I think that's great. A lot of people have majored in these areas, but from my story, you can take away, I majored in finance. So it doesn't matter if you have one of these degrees. It's nice. I don't want to dismiss that, but if you don't have it, don't be discouraged. So once you have that undergraduate degree, you might be thinking like, oh, would you recommend an advanced degree, or would you recommend that I get a certification? And to that, I would say it really depends. Confidently, I say it depends. Can you, you have to consider time and money. So can you make the time to go and get an advanced degree, and can you afford it? Like I had said, I had the time and I didn't have the money, but my company gave me tuition reimbursement, so that was great. One thing that I like, an analogy that I make, if any of you have pets, when I was younger, my sister wanted to buy me a dog for my birthday, and she actually had asked my husband if she could get me one. And he asked me, and I was like, we were discussing this, and we were like, we don't have the time. We're never home. It's very expensive. You know, it can be expensive to have a pet. I don't know if we should do it. But we got our little dog, and I put his picture here because then all the pet lovers on the call will feel a connection with me. And if not, you have to admit he's very cute. So we got the dog, and we basically just changed our lives, and it didn't, you know, it was fine. Like, I don't even remember what life was like without a pet. And so much though that we actually got a second dog. So there's my two cuties. I have to work them in every presentation that I give. So hopefully you enjoy looking at them. Okay, and then the other thing is, if you are considering a graduate degree, you want to make sure that the program is reputable. So I'm sure you all know, like, accreditation at colleges. You want to make sure that the program that you're looking at meets certain educational standards and is considered of a certain quality. When I went to Bentley, there wasn't that many programs. I think only like one or two, and everything was physical. You had to attend physically. So I really only had one choice. But now there's so many programs, good programs, just in the Massachusetts area. So definitely do your research and just make sure it's a good one. So if you can't make the time or the resources, let's talk about boot camps or certification programs. I get asked a lot, like, what do you think about the various certification programs? And again, I'm going to say it kind of depends, but the things that you want to take a look at is the reputation of the certification, looking at the cost and the time. Like General Assembly can get up to like $20,000, I believe. So you want to make sure that it's worth it. And one of the other things that I would look at is, do they teach you about both UX design and UX research? Because as you're looking at certifications, unless you have a strong lean towards one or the other, you definitely want to get exposure to both. And I would even recommend trying to get exposure to both, because as a UX designer, you definitely need to understand research, and you'll probably end up doing some of that yourself. And as a researcher, you obviously want to understand what you're informing on the design side. The other thing that I put up here is there's an art and science behind UX. So there's the left brain, right brain kind of. There's things that depend on physiology and how people's brains process information. Could depend on environmental factors, color blindness, accessibility. There's all these things about UX that don't have anything to do with just collecting feedback and coming up with opinions and conclusions based on that. So make sure that you're able to get exposure to both of those areas in whatever certification you're getting. The other thing is you want to definitely, whether it's a graduate school program or a certification, you need to take advantage of the opportunity to build your portfolio, because again, if you don't have a lot of experience, this is where you can get some of it. And you also want to try to get some mentorship, which is always good to have along the way. And only some certification programs have that as part of it. You can research your options, and you can look at how quality different programs are through. I listed some of the areas like Medium, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning. Google's up here just because I'm always Google searching things, not so much because of their certification program, but just these are all considerations that you want to take a look at. And then if you're like, well, I don't have time or money for a certification program either, or I already got a certification program, but I don't want to go back to graduate school, some of the other things that will be helpful as a UX designer researcher are some of the soft skills, more skills around UX, collaboration, prototyping, and some other things. So I just kind of brainstormed in my own head, like, what are some of the skills that we look for when we're interviewing people? And obviously, like, the negotiation and influence is really important. I'm going to talk about this with the interviewing, but one of the really top interview questions we ask candidates is around how do you handle pushback, and what if your manager disagrees with some design work that you did, like how do you handle that? So any skills around giving, receiving feedback, thickening up your skin, all of that's good. With the UX stuff, I'll just point out, again, we ask a lot of questions around design thinking. What's the process that you've used to get to the design that you chose? So when I interview, I'm less interested in the actual deep dive into knowing every piece of information about the product that you worked on, and I'm much more interested in your thought process around it and how you identified the right problem and the right solution, and how you made sure that you did it in the right way. And accessibility is another huge area that we are always looking for people to have expertise in. So that's just going to keep growing and growing. And then I just put some other tools up here. I honestly, when I'm interviewing people, if they have everything else that I need, we use Figma at Fidelity. I don't care. Everything changes. And I think the tools are similar enough that if you know a couple, you can pick them up really fast. But it's never going to hurt you to learn additional tools. And then more and more, I think you're going to find companies looking for agile experience. So it's something to just have a good understanding of. So those are some of the other subjects that you could look into. Now, if you're like, I don't want to do any more learning classes or certifications or online, then I would recommend going to books. And I put OG books. There's a bunch of classics. These are like my 4 favorite classics. So I would definitely recommend a copy of each of these, not just on your bookshelf, but to actually read them. And I think they're so fascinating. So if you have not read these, I would definitely pick those up. So that is the end of number 1, which is the biggest one the biggest of all. And I can't see anybody, so I'm just hoping that people are still there. Okay, we'll move on to number 2. This is to know your passion. So this is important because there's different areas to explore in UX. I alluded to UXR, UXD. If you end up at a smaller company, you might be able to get more of a generalist position where you do a little bit of everything. At a larger company, you're probably going to have to choose because they have different functions that specialize in different areas. So I have a tool for this, which I use a lot, and I've used a lot over the years as I manage people or coach people with their careers. If you get a 2-column piece of paper and you put in one column the things that you enjoy doing most in your current role or any job that you've worked at, if you can think back, and then what you don't like as much. So I always say to my employees, like, when you wake up in the morning and you go to start your work, what are the things you're like, oh, I just don't want to do that? You kind of put it to the side. For me, it's like working in Excel. I just can't stand it. So I will do anything before I start like reconciling stuff in a spreadsheet or budgeting. But as you start to write out in these columns the things that you like and don't like, you'll start to see trends of certain things. Like on this example that I have here, it's more like strategic work on the left, and more getting into the weeds on the right. So what that tells me is that this person would be better in a more strategic role than in something that's very data dense and heavy, and they'd probably enjoy doing more future looking work than detailed, like updating a feature on a data dense table. So once you have these columns and you figure out where you fall and what your interests are, it's probably going to lead you into either research or design. Or if you really love them both equally, then you might want to look at a smaller company and see if you can find a generalist role. For number 3, find a mentor. I'm sure you've all heard that. And I would say don't be shy. So how do you find the person, and what kinds of questions are you asking? You can look online, but I always would suggest something a little bit more personal. I like looking at someone that you know or you've worked with in the past. You could, if you see a speaker at a conference, you could walk up to them and start getting into a discussion about that. I think one thing that you could assume is that if somebody's speaking at a conference, they're probably already like mentoring a lot of people, and I just wouldn't make that assumption. I think it can never hurt to ask. And if the person that you're talking to is, not interested, they maybe would know someone or can refer you, or maybe you can just ask them if you can connect with them on LinkedIn to keep in touch. So that will lead into the next suggestion. But anywhere that you meet somebody is, this is all like, it kind of meshes with networking, but you can always be looking like, is this somebody that can mentor me? I also, if you're working right now, it's good to find a mentor at your own company, especially if you're not in UXD right now and you're trying to get there. That person might be able to help you navigate some of the politics, might be able to help you make some connections in other areas. So if you can make some connections with wherever UX might live in your particular company, they might be able to help you figure out some ways to work yourself into that area. And then referrals from family and friends is always an easy one. There's also some websites that you can go to get a mentor. So you could look at these. I have not used. These both came from my team. A couple people sent me adplist.org, and the other one I have not used, but I did get that suggestion as well. So if you're struggling to find someone to mentor you, it's worthwhile to take a look at these sites. I have this picture here because you definitely want to find a mentor that's interested in helping you advance and helping you develop. It's not just finding like a person with a big title who, you think might be able to help you get a job. It's somebody who's really going to help, like be invested in you and want to help you develop. And when you do have a mentor, or as you're starting to look for one, it's really important that you know what your goals are for that relationship. And I would write those down. relationships. And then you can do some research. You also should be conducting some interviews, particularly if you're using a site or you're not having a direct referral or it's not somebody that you met, but you want to make sure that you connect with the person and that you have a certain area of comfort where you could be really open and honest with them. And this is to get out of your comfort zone. I think the statistics of UX people that are introverted is almost flipped from the general population. So we tend to be a nice group of introverts, and it's not comfortable to go up to strange people or to share and show your vulnerabilities, but you have to kind of get out of that, or you're not gonna get as much out of the relationship as you might want. And just to be willing to commit to that mentorship. So make sure that you have stated goals, that when you get on that first call with the person who says they'd be willing to talk to you, and maybe it's not for a full mentorship, but you can just ask them if they'd mind spending a half hour, an hour talking to you about your career. Maybe it can evolve into that. But you definitely don't want to get on that call and wait for that person to lead the discussion. You should be leading that. The next one, number 4, is to write up your elevator pitches. So for anybody who might not be familiar with this term, my husband was not familiar with this term, which was hysterical to me, but he's not in the business field. 30 to 45 seconds, it's supposed to be the time that you get in an elevator and somebody says like, oh, what do you do for a living? I don't think anybody does that in elevators anymore. I find that in the elevators I'm in, people just look at their phones and they don't really talk to each other. But this really is something that you can use in any networking situation. So it's just, what do you do? And you need to customize it and have it ready to go based on whatever situation that you're in. So if you're talking to somebody who knows UX, they understand what UX is, that's going to be one type of elevator pitch. If you're talking to somebody who doesn't know what UX is, but they might be in a company that has a solid UX department, you're going to have a different kind of pitch. This is also good for if you're looking for a mentor, because you don't have to have a mentor that has UX background. You're really just looking for somebody to help you generate ideas to help you keep advancing. So have a couple ready to customize. And then the more you practice them, the more you can adapt them to the situation. I think like having just 2 and then figuring out how you need to massage those in the moment is good. And then there's a ton of examples of elevator pitches online. You don't have to go strictly by, I almost included a couple examples, and then I was like, you know what, you have to be comfortable with what you're saying. So it's good to look for a structure online, but you don't need to stick fully to the exact wording or things like that. And so all of this kind of lends itself to number 5, which is to build your network. Every interaction that you have, whether it's online or in person, is an opportunity, and you have to train your mind to think that way, and you have to embrace that inner extrovert. Anywhere you go, you should be thinking like, I could network here. And I put some examples here of how you can start building your network beyond where it is right now. And again, it's uncomfortable. I do not like going into a room full of people. So for me, I try to get myself into situations where there's smaller groups, where it's not so crowded. There's different ways that you can do it. You can go with somebody who can introduce you to other people. The other thing that I think is a great opportunity is if you're at something like a fundraiser event, or a sporting event that a friend or somebody's kids are in, or your kids are in. If you have a hobby like volleyball or pickleball or tennis or anything like that, these are all great opportunities to just get to know people. You don't have to network about looking for a job right away. You can just start to build some relationships, and you never know where they're going to go. I also have on here people you've managed. If you have been in management, there's no levels in building networks. It's just, who do people know? What connections do they have? And then easier for us introverts is to do this online. On LinkedIn, when I say customize your message, we all know that. We've heard that 1,000 times. Like, it's pretty rare now that people just are blindly accepting all of the requests that they're getting to connect. But I've had people actually look at my profile and Google search me and find out some things about me, and they've included that in their messages. And those are the ones that get my attention more than just the, you know, we're both in UX, or I'm in UX and I'm looking to build my network. I'm not really sure, like when I get those, I'm always like, what does that mean? You're looking to, like, you're just looking to add connections in UX, but like, what are you doing with all these connections? So I like to be intentional, and I've started to get really intentional about the connections that I accept, and I really appreciate when people take time to do the research. So it's almost like I'm inviting people to stalk me so that they can write me a nice message on LinkedIn. Yes, a little weird. A lot of nice sites are always good. Recruiters, UX designers, and researchers at companies of interest. When I was looking for a job, which again, I just went through this a year ago, I started finding the recruiters that were on job listings that I was interested in at certain companies and messaging them on LinkedIn. So I'd apply and then I'd message. If I knew people that knew other people at those companies, I was really like doing some deep searching on LinkedIn and really becoming an expert on connecting this person to this company, to that person, to that person. And one of the examples that I use is I was looking at a job that was open at Gartner. I don't know if you guys know about Gartner, but it's a research firm, and I didn't know anybody there, and I had really close relationships with one of their top competitors, which is Forrester. And so I contacted people that I know at Forrester to ask them to get me into Gartner. And they actually, the guy that was helping me, he actually said, you know, we have positions at Forrester that you should be looking at. So then I started doing Forrester. So you just never know where things are going to come from. And then these meetups and special interest groups. I got the Creative Mornings and Service Design Network. I honestly had not heard of either one. I got those from my team. The Creative Mornings sounded really cool. So I don't know if you all have checked that out. She's actually in New York, but I believe it's virtual, and they have some in-person events. I'm not positive, but she really liked it. And then obviously there's UXPA, which I would never forget to mention. Okay, we're halfway. Number 6 is to demonstrate your expertise. So when you're following people on LinkedIn, which is really easy to do, if they're posting stuff, like, have an opinion on what they post. You don't have to be obnoxious. You can still disagree with somebody in a very positive way. You could agree and do the yes and type of response, but start to get your name out there and start to really show that you do have an opinion. You don't have to just follow what everybody's saying, but you can do it. You can also do that and add on to it. Participating in online forums is always great, and writing articles and blogs. So, you know, there's Medium, which is a really great way to just start writing stuff. If you're not a good writer, maybe not the answer for you, but just don't be afraid to participate and show that you're an expert. You're also going to learn a lot as you start getting more and more involved in following people. And then the next one is to create an amazing portfolio. So for the portfolio, you should have at least 2 projects on it, and you want to tell a story. When I look at portfolios, I like to see annotations on them. This screenshot is just a Google image that I put on the slide, but it kind of shows, so you don't have to read it, but it kind of shows, I really like when people put annotations on to say, like, this is what I did, this is why I did it, this was the problem we identified, this is how we identified it, this is, you know, early prototype, more, you know, then we got feedback, we did another prototype, then we got some testing done. So again, really looking at the process and the thinking behind how you come up with your designs. And then if you do have a mentor, it's great if that person is a UX person, or even not, but better if they are, to review your portfolio, try to get somebody in the field. And I'd look online for examples of good portfolios as well. Mainly, I think that you just want it to be clear and clean. And for UX, I am less about the visual design, but obviously you want the visual design to look nice, but we're really looking at, again, your thinking process. And then you might be thinking, Lori, hello, I wouldn't be here if I had content for an amazing portfolio because I'm a new designer. So let's talk about some opportunities to build your portfolio. You can use, you could put more than one project from your degree or certification program in your portfolio, but you want to also have something else besides something that you did in school. You got to show that real world. And these are things that I've seen that have really impressed me. I had one person show up with an existing app that they did not like, that they completely redesigned. And I thought it was a really good way of showing they went through the whole user-centered design process, and then they came up with a new design for an app, or you could do it for a website also. Accessibility, as I mentioned, is really huge. So let's say you don't want to redesign their experience, but you want to demonstrate that you understand accessibility. That's another thing you could do. Either you could redesign it and also make it accessible, or you could just take a design and say, this is how I would make it accessible. So that's another good example that you could use in your portfolio. And the other thing is someone came to one of the interviews and she had identified a problem in the world that frustrated her and came up with a solution for it. And she presented that. So her example was planning a weekend getaway with a bunch of friends. And so she had customers of the application that she could get feedback from. She had pain points that she was able to identify. She could do a survey. She could develop wireframes. She could iterate them and then create higher fidelity wireframes. So to me, that was a really creative way of showing the approach and being in the real world and doing something. And then there's volunteer work. I was on Volunteer Match for a while. There's something Catch a Fire. If you can find volunteer work where it's more complex than just redesigning a website, where it's more focused on visual design, the more complex you can find something to volunteer for, the better. So those are always also options. So hopefully you got some ideas from that. This is like my favorite slide because I do feel like it's the most challenging to build your portfolio without a job, but I also feel like it's what great things that you can do, and I'm sure it's not this as well. Okay, so getting the interview. I like this statement. Use who and what united gets where you want to go. So again, tying back into all the networking and things like that, really leverage your past and present. Back to my example, if you noticed, like every role that I had, I built on to get to the next role that I wanted. And you can do that too. So if you find the company that you want, or if it is your current employer, find someone you know that can help you get to that next spot where you want to go and leverage that person and those people. I also want to point out that I put internships on this slide because I didn't have another place for it, and I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned this. If you're looking for internships, a lot of people have contacted me about internships, summer internships, and they've contacted me in the beginning of the year up until, through January. And I would just say that Fidelity closed its internship application program in like October of last year. So that's pretty early. My company that I worked for before Fidelity, they closed their application acceptance for internships in January, February. But if you're looking to get a summer internship, you need to target the company and find somebody there that can tell you when they close that program, because otherwise you're out of luck. Like, you just don't want to wait. Okay. So let's see what else I have here. Yeah, if you also, if you work at a company that has a UXD department, try to form a relationship with the manager of that department and see if you can volunteer to help or shadow. You could shadow and then you could volunteer to help with some project. So all of these ways to just get yourself, again, initiated into that network and getting some experience. It's all going to help you. Okay. And then the next one, number 9, is to prepare for the interview. One thing you're always going to be, I think you're always going to be asked for in an interview is to tell us a little bit about yourself. And it's, let's take your resume and sum it up in a few minutes. When you do that, it's not like an invitation to just read your resume. It's really an invitation to hear. For me, I listen for what the person's telling me out of their resume, and I start to identify what they're passionate about, what they're highlighting, how excited they are when they talk about different things. So make sure that you have, it's almost like an elevator pitch, but it's a long elevator pitch. So make sure you have that ready to go and practiced. Definitely organize your presentation. I've had a lot of people show up flying around Figma files to demonstrate something, and it's really just like a dizzying effect. I personally really like it when people put their portfolio in a PowerPoint presentation. And a lot of times they'll start with like their background and some general information before they go into the portfolio, which I think is great as well. So as long as you have something that's organized and it's going to keep you on track. Definitely have questions ready for the interviewer. Again, like everything kind of has like a second meaning to me. I like it when people ask questions, and I am really interested in what questions they're asking me. And if they have some more creative or more unique questions, showing what are you passionate about. If people are asking me about culture, collaboration opportunities, learning opportunities, you know, that tells me one thing. If they're asking me about the design system, that tells me something else. So have some good questions ready for the interviewer, and challenge the interviewers. At Fidelity, we always make sure that we leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end of portfolio reviews so that we have a chance to ask a couple closing questions, but more so that the candidate has time to ask us questions. And that's a huge opportunity that you don't want to give up. And then apply to positions that might not interest you for practice. So when I started interviewing, I applied blanket everywhere. I didn't even worry about titles. I just, I looked at experience levels, obviously, but I was really applying to any job that I saw, whether I was interested in that company or not, because I hadn't interviewed for 20 years, first of all. And I wasn't sure that I was gonna know, like I was Google searching, like what kinds of interview questions are people asking? And I was writing out answers, but you really need to have some good practice. And the best way to do that is to do it with a company that you don't really care about. One of the companies I started interviewing with, they had me go through, I'm going to say like 6 or 7 rounds of interviews. Some were with the same exact people in different situations. They asked me to put together an hour-long presentation. They asked me to interview with someone while I was on family vacation. And each interview that I went to, I hated the company more and more, but gave me great experience. I got to, meet all different kinds of people and get all different kinds of interviewing styles. In the presentation that I put together, I actually used in other interviews. So it was all beneficial. And ironically, the first company that I interviewed with was Fidelity, which is one that I said I'd never work at again because I already worked there. And I loved it so much. So I did end up working at Fidelity, not through that first position, but. Okay, and then the other thing is when you're talking about your background, I meant to say that, you want to try to tie in the experiences that you've had that aren't in UX to UX. So if you look at, let's say you're a customer service rep or architect.
Ooh, Lori, I think we lost your audio there for a second. It might have been your headphones or something, just for a second.
When did it cut out?
Just about 5 seconds ago. That sounds
Okay.
better though. It sounds like you're closer to the mic now. Thank you.
I'm holding
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. So let me see, what was I saying? Oh, if you had a role as like a bartender or waitress or any type of service, phone rep, you can start talking about, like, I did this and there I was able to learn empathy. I was able to identify the right problem, like especially customer service reps. I mean, all the skills are so similar. We actually hired somebody from our service center at Fidelity into a junior UXD role because there's so many similarities there. So try to figure out how your experience, what else that lends to as far as UX. And then write out some common questions. Like I said, I have looked up behavioral interviewing is what everybody's doing now. Tell me about a time when. I put some common questions that I generally hear and ask on here. This doesn't mean everybody does. When I started interviewing, I wrote out answers. I typed them to like 30 questions. And then I started highlighting and bullet pointing, and I had them spread out all in front of me. And I was cheating as they were asking me questions. I was looking for some of the things that I had written out until I got so used to interviewing that I didn't have to really look anymore. But you got to take the time to do this. You don't want to go off the top of your head on this stuff. You really want to be thoughtful about it and have like good, succinct answers. Let's see what else. And then I say practice, practice, practice. I can't say that enough. It's just, it's invaluable, and it's just really hard to go into interviews cold and make stuff up, and the interviewer knows that. So my last, number 10, is to follow best practices for interviewing. You should just, for the interview, whether you're in person or remote, it matters to me. I have hired people that were wearing t-shirts and baseball hats, but the market's a little bit different now. I just think it gets you off on the right foot, and it shows respect for the interviewer. So I don't care if you're remote. I don't care what's going on below your waist. But if you can just try to look like you try to present yourself nicely, that's great. Be yourself. Obviously, if you're trying to be somebody else, you're going to get into the job and you're not going to like it. So check in with the interviewer. I specifically put this on here because I've been in a number of interviewers where the candidate has just talked and talked and talked and talked, and never noticed, like, never checked in, never said, do you have any questions? Never asked if they were talking too much or on the right track. And it's hard. And if you get asked a question and you're going on and on and on with the answer, you might just want to check back with the interviewer. And again, this is me. But I think if you're interviewing for a UX job, you have to have an understanding of what's going on in the room around you, and you have to be reading the room. And to just talk and talk and talk without checking in demonstrates to me that that person isn't really aware of what's going on. And I think, again, because it's UXD, it's super important. Do your research, prepare those unique questions, which I mentioned before. And if you're remote, make sure you test your background well in advance. Things are always going to happen that you can't control. But if you test it in advance, and I would say to always have your cell phone next to you, because if something goes down or your connection goes down, it's a really fast way to get back into the call. And check your background. I have had people interview with their like unmade beds, their, I don't know, their clothes thrown everywhere. It doesn't have to be, I don't care if your bed's back there, we just make it, like just some effort would be great. Or you can always blur it. Okay, so my summary here for anybody that just wants the main list, I just put them all together to summarize everything up. And I'll just leave that here for a second if anybody wants to take a picture. And then the last thing to wrap up is just to take advantage of the internet. I did a lot of, I put this presentation together kind of from scratch, and I said my experiences, but I did a lot of searching online and a lot of validating with other people, other peers. And there's great information online now, so take advantage of that. And that is it. So I will stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you, Lori, so much for sharing your wisdom and all these great ideas with everyone. We do have questions coming in fast and furious. One of them that I just saw go by was about, which I think is really interesting, is from Miriam. How can you find a balance between being told you are too experienced for internships, but not experienced enough for junior level roles?
It's hard to answer that without knowing like the specifics of the company and what they're looking for. I just think you have to spread your wings because everybody's gonna interpret things differently. Like we have very defined criteria for like a pre-junior role, like an associate designer role versus junior, senior, and principal. So I think depending on the company, it's going to be different, but I would just say, just keep on trying to, the more experience you can get, you know, you can get up to that junior level role. You can also, you know, or I don't know if who submitted this, if the recruiter had called them back to talk about what they were applying for. I'd like to know like why you were too qualified for an internship, because in that case, I might say, what is that internship? Because if you're a junior designer, any design work would be valuable for you to get. So are you getting somebody's coffee? I don't know. Like,
that was
I consider it close.
Yeah, Miriam, do you want to share a little more context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually looking, hopefully, for a research role. I'm transitioning from a background in neuroscience and counseling psychology into UX research. The issue that I keep running up against is a lot of internships at pretty much any major company that I've seen, and even any internships I've seen posted anywhere, require that you be in a degree program with a graduation set in the future. So they automatically will reject your application and they don't offer you the opportunity for internships or for volunteering or for any of that type of work. And then junior designer or junior researcher roles, as kind of confusing as it is, I've seen people go from 1 to 5 years of experience for a junior role. And so it puts you in this really weird situation where you don't have the prerequisites for an internship, but you also are not being considered for junior roles because you don't have experience.
Yeah, the only thing I can suggest is look at some of the other suggestions that I put to try to get your portfolio a little bit more developed. I know what you're saying about the internships. I have heard that you have to be in a degree program to get an internship. I'm not sure how heavily. I think an internship is a great way to get into a company, but if you're not in a program and you can't get the internship, you gotta find other ways. You know, it's the world. A hard world.
Yeah, and following on that one from Meredith, do you have any suggestions, Lori, for portfolio building exercises for a UX research centric portfolio? Because, specifically if someone has to build that UXR portfolio, how is it, what are some ideas for that's more specialized portfolio for the researchers among us?
Yeah, and I'm so sorry. I'm not gonna answer that because I don't have that expertise.
Okay.
I only look at designer resumes.
Yeah.
But I would encourage whoever asked that question to find someone in UX research and talk to them about that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a mentorship or anything. You could just reach out to somebody and ask them, or you could try Google searching.
Yeah, and I actually hire and review a lot of research.
Oh yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, so I can answer that one. I'll take that one. So I would say actually it's not that different. So same approach, 2 good, robust case studies, if you have the experience and have those case studies, but I think the approach is similar, that you would want to kind of do a research project similarly how Lori was saying, take an app and redesign it, you know, for make it more accessible or just make it more usable. I would say the same to a budding content designer, that you would do the same thing, make the content more accessible, more useful, more usable, helpful, human-centered, all of those things. So I really don't think the approach is that different. It would just depend on the amount of work experience you had. And if you, you know, have those good case studies already, it would be, you know, talking about what was the goal of the research, what was the approach, you give that kind of overview, and then get into the details and make sure that you're, you know, sometimes with a research project, it's really hard to stay high level. It's really easy to get lost and start wallowing in the details. And just remember to understand your audience won't have the same interest or time for all of the wonderful nuggets and details and insights that you pulled from your subject. And you fall in love with your subject. So just remember to keep it high level, pull out the key insights, make it interesting, make it exciting, but move along. Because in the research realm, we tend to get bogged down in loving our story so much. And storytelling, especially in a research presentation, is a key skill. So work on your storytelling. Let's see. I think I had an earlier question. From Luis, when UX designers redesign an existing app for their portfolio, do they typically build the app, or are they just making a proposed design? I guess, how far do they have to take the redesign for it to be considered legit in a portfolio? Ooh, great question. I like that one.
So if you look at an existing app and redesign it, how far do you have to go?
For the portfolio, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I've never seen anybody do this. I would be interested in, you know, just looking at, again, it's the process. It's not the finished product. So to me, I would be interested in seeing like what your approach was. What problem did you identify? You know, what are you proposing as a solution, an early prototype of what you would do, and then getting some feedback. So it's just like, it's the process. I don't look for high fidelity prototypes and portfolio reviews, to be honest. We really want to know that you know how to do user-centered design and design thinking. So I would say I wouldn't take it like super high fidelity. I would just, you know, show your process and show, you know, what you think should be changed and why.
Okay.
Was that an answer?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I would just add on to that one that it can be tempting to be all about the pixels and make it pretty and get carried away with your prototyping. But again, to Lori's point earlier, she as the interviewer or I as the interviewer, we're going to be really interested in your thinking and your strategy behind it, and what problem are you trying to solve, and what problem did the original app not solve for the user. So it's really not about you making something sexy and pretty and gleaming and bright and shiny and, oh boy, look at me, I can prototype. Anyone can prototype. It's like, are you, isolating some problem that is more interesting than what the original builders, did? And how are you making it better, more usable, more useful? Are you thinking about accessibility? I work on an inclusive design team, so of course I'm obsessed with accessibility. So that's what I'd be looking for. And yes, if you can make it a clickable prototype, great to showcase that. But even if you don't, and you just have a wireframe, I'd be totally fine with that too, as your audience.
Yeah, kind of when I see like the Figma, Adobe, blah, 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 blah on the side, I kind of assume like that, prototyping, that's definitely not like the top of my list to see. Also, as far as visual design goes, for me, like in our area, we're so data dense and we have such a well-defined, such a mature design system that I'm less interested in the visual design, whereas I have colleagues that support our marketing areas from the UXD side, and they're looking for people with heavier visual design skills or more interest in visual design. So these are all like considerations that you want to keep in mind when you're putting together your portfolio. Like, I would not go into an interview. I know it's really hard to try to do this, but I wouldn't go into an interview trying to please the interviewer. I would go in there knowing what you're passionate about, because it's going to come through in the interview. And if you love visual design, there's UX design positions that are more visually design heavy and require that more. For me, when I see a heavy visual design background, I know the person's not going to be happy in my group, because we just don't have that creative freedom on the design side. We have it on the UX side, but not on visuals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And somebody made a comment, you know, if you're in boot camp, yes, of course, they're going to want to see pixel perfect, because that's why you're at boot camp. They aren't calling it like sleepover fun, let's toast marshmallow camp. It's boot camp, people. So yes, that's a great point. But in the, you know, in the realm of coming in for a job interview, we're looking at what your brain can do. And, you know, the higher the level for the design role, the expectation will be that you're going to make things pixel perfect. So we're not going to be as fixated on that. We're just going to have the expectation like, yes, it's, you know, going to be neat and hospital corners and perfect, but what can your brain do? What value are you as a strategic thinker and a user-centered thinker going to bring to the team? Because that's what you'll be, you know, hopefully doing for us every single day, coming up with those kind of, that kind of thinking and ideas. Let's see. I just
wanted to add something that I thought of as you were talking. When you get the interview, it's also really important to have a strong presence and a strong confidence, because even if you don't have the skills, if I feel like someone's going to be able to hold their ground, not today, but like going forward in the future, that's going to mean a lot to me as well. So just something to think about as you're interviewing. You are a UX designer, you're starting your career, you're ready to go, you're passionate about the work, you're passionate about the users. You can't wait to, you know, get in there and just start designing and working and learning from other designers. So those are, again, things that come out based on like your passion and what you want to do. But as soon as you start trying to, back to my point about, as soon as you start trying to please the interviewer or do what you think the interviewer is looking for, you're going to lose. So again, be yourself and just show your excitement and how much you want it, and it's going to come through.
And be humble and be excited about learning. Because this is very top of mind for me right now, because my team, we're working on, for our design org, we're working on writing and figuring out how to create our competencies and our leveling model right now, the framework for that. So I'm obsessed with it at the moment, because that's what we're chosen to work on that. So it is kind of interesting to think about that and think about the skills people need, as, you know, we think about the core design skills, and then the different groups of designers that we have and different specialties and subspecialties, and then think about the different levels within all of those. So we have generalists, specialists, we have subspecialists who are generally generalists. So it gets very confusing, but we have to kind of create this framework so everybody fits in. But, you know, be humble, be interested in your peers, be interested in learning from them. Be eager to always learn. Don't come in thinking, oh, I already know everything because I went to boot camp, because believe me, you don't. You know, you're always going to be learning. This is a good one. I think when a job posting says 1 to 3 years of experience, do companies consider related transferable experience, or does that mean strictly UX roles?
So that's a hard one on my side, and Rachel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, but there's so many different terms now that are used for UX, like people have product design, or I don't know, there's a lot of different things. And for me, 1 to 3 years means, have you been working in some type of UX role. It could be product design, which isn't exactly UX. But do you have experience with, again, like a broken record, with that design thinking? And what in your role, and this is good things to think about as you're bullet pointing out your responsibilities in your previous roles, how do they relate back to UX? I also would not let a year's requirement, like 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 10 plus, and just ignore that. Just look at what's required in the job description outside of the years and see how you can position your resume in such a way that you're hitting the bullet points that are in that job description. So if they say, 3 years of product design work, try to figure out in your past, what have you done that lended itself towards product design or UX design? And also try to pull in keywords from the job descriptions into your resumes. You might have to adapt your resume slightly based on the job descriptions, but a lot of this is being done through searches that the recruiters are using. So at Fidelity, I can tell you, we have a very close-knit group of 40, we're called chapter leads, but we all work really closely together with our recruiter. And if somebody, it's very easy if you know someone to get your resume looked at. I guess is what I'm saying. You would think in such a huge company, it would be very hard. But there's keyword matching, and then the primary way would be to know someone who knows someone. But I don't know. I don't even pay attention to that 1 to 3 years. And I've heard a couple of people recently who applied for a certain level, and we've offered them a different level because we just, it doesn't, you could have 10 years in UX design, but when we start talking through, a little portfolio review and hear what their experience is like, I offer them a lower position.
Oh, Lori, I think we're losing your audio again.
Again? How's that?
Yeah. Oh, there. That's back. Yeah.
Okay. I was just saying, like, I would get so hung up on the number of years.
Yeah. And I think too, I would say if you have, 60 to 70% of the qualifications in the job description, go for it. And there have been studies that say that, women think they have to have 100% of the qualifications in the job description. So don't let that hold you back. And I will say that this year we've been trying to hire an inclusive researcher, and that job doesn't really exist yet in our world. It's really a position that exists only in academia. So the people that we were interviewing mostly came from academic backgrounds. So we haven't yet even been able to hire that role. So we have a very clear idea of who we need and what the qualifications are. Then we would bring them into interview, and they would kind of fall apart under the rigor of the interview because they really were coming from the academic realm, where it's a very different environment and it's a very different pace. So we're kind of right now, we put a pause on it to rethink, should we really just hire a UX researcher who we can train into that role rather than bring someone from academia who may not be able to adapt to the corporate environment. So it's been pretty tough going through that, and it's been tough for the candidates. And it's a really specific type of skill set that somebody has to have to be able to conduct that type of research. So it's a learning curve on that for both sides and for our recruiters too. So I would say if you think like your experience is transferable and you have maybe 60% of what the job description says, I say go for it. Go big or go home.
100% agree. I mean, you read up a job description, and our job descriptions we call them evergreen descriptions. We have one for a senior, one for principal level. I don't think we have an evergreen for junior. In my group, we don't so much hire junior designers because we just don't have the structure to support that. But we're starting to get there. We're starting to build that structure in my group so that we can do that, but you need like a more senior designer with a junior designer. Oh my gosh, I just totally lost my train of thought about that. Oh, yes. So we're always gonna, the job descriptions are gonna be, at Fidelity, they're very generic because they're evergreen. They apply to all the different areas. I totally agree, Rachel. Like, just apply. You know, if you're qualifying, you definitely do not have to have all the skills in any job description. Somebody's putting together their wish list, and if they find a candidate that has every single one of those, every single bullet point check, then that person's ready for the next job. Like, they're overqualified in my book. So yeah, especially for the, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but yes, for the ladies on the call or the females on the call, like, I've had also men work for me. Imposter syndrome it's real, and don't let it beat you.
Yeah, so we've also had a question, which I don't think we'll be able to accommodate this, asking, could you switch to hiring manager mode and throw some questions at us? Because I don't think this is the right format for that. But I will say there are lots of, you know, there's LinkedIn, different sites have, you know, lots of, like, a wealth of information about that. They have, you know, like, all the questions you're going to be asked at your interview to help prep you. Lori, do you have any advice about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if, who put this, Gita?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you got a shot of the slide that I had up there with my interview questions, but those are mine. So there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, you know, it really depends on the interviewer. I think there's some that are very common. But I don't know if there's anything more behind that you wanted, like, the right answer, but there's really not one.
And from Min, we have, would you mind sharing what skills and experience a principal UX designer needs to have to become a director or high-level UX leader? So I'm guessing too, Min, that sounds like you want to leave the IC track and go over to more of a managerial track, right? So that's kind of a switch there. So that's really interesting, because we did have a presentation. We had a presenter earlier in the year, and it was a group, and they came in and talked about how some of them, it was a woman that leads a group, and they came in, there were 4 of them, and they talked about how some of them had been switching back and forth from IC to manager a few times, and some of them had just stuck to manager. And I do think that's a thing that people have to deal with over their career. So any advice, Lori, for people who are making that switch? Or Min, if you want to jump in a little bit and ask any further details on that one.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you, Lori. I'm now supporting our core center representative. So when you share experience, is super resonating and it's super inspiring as well. So I want to know more about how you progress your career from principal and to the director or high level. Yeah. Thank you.
So I think my career is not a good example, because I started like 25 years ago before there was UX. And I don't think I ever had those titles. But I will say, just for Fidelity, like, we have career ladders. We have very defined descriptions for each of those roles. And it's probably different everywhere. But one thing that we do at Fidelity too is, like, in my group, we have, they're called focus area leaders. So our principal designers also take on this responsibility to be a focus area leader. So one of my designers is, he's a principal designer on our trading platform, but he's a focus area leader for all investment products. So he's responsible for coaching, and he has not had any experience in managing. So he's now coaching across this focus area to make sure that there's a strategy across them. And because our platform is so huge, it's the same users using all the different products. So our focus area leaders is like that step into coaching others, and it also helps them to get clarity on if they do want to move further into management or go director IC. We have both director IC and director managers. So I would just encourage you, like, if Fidelity is a company that you're interested in, you can look on our website and pull up those two different descriptions. I think that, but that's our path that we have set up for somebody to go from a principal designer to management.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's the end of the questions in the chat. Does anyone have any last questions for Lori before we call it a night? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Big thank you to Lori for this really great presentation and such a timely topic and so helpful to so many folks. I don't have our presenter lined up for next month yet, but that'll be going out as soon as we do have that ready. But thank you to all who attended tonight, and thanks so much for all the great questions. And hope to see you at our next and all our future monthly meetings.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This was really fun for me. I hope you guys have stuff on your pieces of paper to do, and it's helpful. So thank you.
Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.